You won't believe what this dog did to save an entire family. When the baby started losing sleep every night, the parents were desperate. But no one could have imagined the real reason behind the strange behavior of the house dog. What seemed to be just a nuisance turned into a shocking discovery. And if you like animal stories as much as I do, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way, you won't miss any upcoming stories. Mark and Sarah lived in a quiet little town in the United States. They had just become parents for the first time, with the birth of little Noah. The house was full of joy, but also of the challenges that every new parent faces. They had Buddy, an affectionate pit bull who had been with them for years. He had always been a calm and affectionate dog, but something started to change since Noah arrived. In the first few days, everything seemed normal, but Sarah noticed that Buddy was acting differently. Every time they put Noah in his crib, Buddy started to get restless. He paced back and forth and eventually started barking, as if he was trying to get their attention. Sarah initially thought it was jealousy. Maybe Buddy was just feeling left out with the arrival of the baby. Mark, on the other hand, didn't see any problem. He believed it was just a phase and that Buddy would get used to it over time. But the days went by, and Buddy's behavior became more intense. Every time Noah slept, the dog became even more agitated, barking in the direction of the baby's room, non-stop. This began to disturb little Noah's sleep and, inevitably, Sarah and Mark's as well. The sleepless nights began to affect the routine of the house. Sarah tried to calm Buddy, but he seemed focused on something they couldn't understand. Maybe he has a health problem, Sarah thought, but there were no signs of illness. Mark tried to stay calm, but the situation was getting difficult. They didn't know what to do anymore, and each night seemed to be worse than the last. Buddy seemed to be trying to tell them something. He stared into the nursery, barking insistently, and this began to make Sarah uneasy. Was he noticing something they couldn't? Each night, Buddy's behavior became more intense, and Mark and Sarah's exhaustion grew. What could be going on? Now, the couple began to seriously wonder if this was just normal dog behavior or if there was something deeper behind Buddy's actions. They needed to find out what was causing this change, and quickly, before the situation got out of hand. That night, Buddy's behavior reached a new level. He began barking frantically, louder and more intense than before. Sarah jumped out of bed and ran to Noah's room while Mark tried to calm the dog. But Buddy wouldn't stop. He seemed desperate to get into the nursery, as if he were warning of imminent danger. Mark decided to lock Buddy in another room of the house, thinking that this would calm him down. But as soon as she closed the door, Buddy started scratching and barking even louder. It was as if he knew he needed to be near Noah at all costs. Sarah, worried about the baby waking up scared, tried to ignore it, but the barking wouldn't stop. Buddy was becoming uncontrollable. The atmosphere in the house began to grow tense. Mark and Sarah, exhausted from lack of sleep, began to argue about what should be done. Mark insisted that it was just jealousy, something temporary that the dog would outgrow. Sarah, however, wasn't so sure anymore. Something about Buddy's behavior made her uncomfortable, as if he were trying to protect Noah from something. The following nights, the pattern continued. Buddy would lie down during the day, but at night, as soon as they put Noah in his crib, he would start acting strange again. He would always stand in the hallway, staring at the bedroom door, and bark nonstop. It was almost as if he was trying to warn them of something they couldn't see. Sarah felt her heart tighten with worry. As the days went by, the couple's exhaustion grew, and their patience grew thinner. Sarah began to observe Buddy more closely, trying to understand what he wanted. But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. Why did he only bark at night? And why did he always go to Noah's room? Mark began to relent, acknowledging that Buddy's behavior was far from normal. He tried to remain calm, but it was clear that the situation was wearing on everyone. Is he seeing or feeling something that we can't? Sarah suggested. Mark, who was usually more skeptical, began to wonder the same thing. The tension was rising, and they knew something had to be done. Buddy's behavior was becoming increasingly unsettling, and now it seemed like the dog was trying to tell them something important. But what? With the situation spiraling out of control, Sarah suggested that it might be time to get help. They didn't know how to handle Buddy anymore, and the thought of continuing to go without sleep was throwing off the balance in the household. I think we need to see a specialist, she told Mark, who finally agreed. They decided to call a dog trainer to see if he could figure out what was going on. The next day, the trainer arrived and began observing Buddy's behavior. He asked the couple to let him interact with the dog and also to let him see how he acted around Noah. Buddy was calm during the day, which confused the couple even more. The trainer explained that, in many cases, dogs can feel jealous of babies, especially when they are the only children for a long time. However, after spending hours with Buddy, the trainer became intrigued. The dog's behavior at night didn't seem to be just jealousy. There was something more, something Buddy was trying to communicate, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it's a territorial issue, the trainer suggested, but that didn't explain the intensity of the pit bull's behavior. Sarah continued to be restless. The trainer suggested some techniques to calm Buddy, but she knew deep down that it wasn't just a behavioral problem. It was something bigger. What if it's an instinct of his, something we're ignoring? She thought. Mark, despite wanting to believe that everything would be solved with training, was also starting to have doubts. If you've made it this far, comment, "I love animal stories." The days went by, and nothing changed. Despite all the training attempts, Buddy continued to get agitated whenever Noah was put down in his crib. The tension grew, and Sarah felt the idea that Buddy was trying to protect them from something. What could be wrong in Noah's room? After another sleepless night, Sarah, exhausted and without answers, began to consider a possibility she had never imagined. "What if we have no choice but to get rid of Buddy?" she asked Mark, tears in her eyes. The thought broke her heart, but Noah's well-being came first. Mark was also torn. He loved Buddy, but seeing his wife so distressed and their baby unable to sleep was unbearable. They decided to give it a few more days to see if the situation improved, but Sarah was already losing hope. Something had to change, and fast. That night, everything seemed normal until Buddy started barking even more desperately. Sarah and Mark were almost falling asleep when the loud barking startled them awake. Sarah ran to Noah's room, her heart racing, and found Buddy standing near the crib, fixated on something on the wall. The baby was agitated, almost waking up, while Buddy didn't take his eyes off that specific spot. Sarah tried to calm the dog, but he wouldn't move. He growled softly, keeping his eyes fixed on that wall, as if there was something there. Sarah's heart sank, and she felt a chill down her spine. There was nothing visible in that place, just an ordinary wall, but Buddy's behavior was frighteningly strange. Mark entered the room soon after, his face worried. Upon seeing the scene, he tried to call Buddy, but the dog remained fixed on that spot. The silence of the night, broken only by Buddy's growls, made the atmosphere even more tense. Sarah looked at Mark, waiting for him to say something that made sense, but he was also at a loss for words. "Is there something wrong with the room?" Mark finally asked. He was visibly shaken by the situation, and for the first time, he seemed to consider that Buddy was, in fact, trying to warn them about something. The silence between them was tense. Sarah moved closer to the wall, watching closely, but she saw nothing wrong. The night went on with difficulty. Even after trying to get Buddy out of the room, the dog remained restless, and Sarah could not relax. The uneasiness she felt intensified, as if something was about to happen. What if Buddy is right? What if he is trying to protect us from something? Sarah whispered, with growing concern. The next morning, unable to get the image of Buddy staring at the wall out of his head, Mark made a drastic decision. He turned to Sarah and said in a serious voice, "I think we should call the police. Just to make sure we're not missing something dangerous." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but after thinking it over, she agreed. Maybe it was overkill, but Buddy's instincts could no longer be ignored. They made the call, and now everything depended on the police coming. The next morning, the police arrived at Sarah and Mark's house. They were a little skeptical after hearing the couple's story. A dog barking at a wall seemed like an odd reason to call the police. Still, they decided to inspect the place to put the family's mind at ease. After all, no one wanted to take any risks, especially with a baby involved. The officers began asking questions about the house, whether any renovations had been done recently or if anything had changed since Noah arrived. Sarah and Mark explained that everything was as usual. Nothing unusual had happened, except for Buddy's behavior, which had become increasingly disturbing as the night wore on. As the officers investigated Noah's room, Buddy continued to be agitated, growling and staring at the same spot on the wall. One of the officers, noticing the dog's insistence, decided to take a closer look at that particular area. He ran his hand along the wall, taking in every detail, until something caught his eye. That's weird," the officer said, pointing to a small, barely noticeable crack in the wall. Sarah and Mark walked over and were momentarily shocked. They had never noticed that crack before. It seemed insignificant, but the fact that Buddy was fixated on that particular spot made them uneasy. The officer decided to use a flashlight to inspect it further. He tapped lightly on the wall and noticed that there was something strange about the sound. "This doesn't sound right," he commented, calling his partner over to help investigate. Sarah and Mark stood anxiously, while Buddy continued to be agitated. Sarah's heart was beating fast, and she couldn't look away from what the officers were doing. After a few more minutes of investigation, the officers discovered something no one expected. There was old, faulty wiring behind that wall. "It looks like you have a serious problem here," the officer said. That wiring is in bad shape and could start a fire at any moment. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She looked at Mark in shock. They had never imagined that they could be in such a big risk. Buddy's behavior, which had initially seemed merely annoying, now made perfect sense. He had been trying to warn them all along about the danger hidden behind that wall. Relief mixed with shock filled the room as the officers explained what they had found. The faulty wiring was on the verge of causing a short circuit, something that could easily result in a fire. Mark and Sarah sat in silence, processing what could have happened if Buddy hadn't warned them about the hidden danger. "He was trying to protect us this whole time," Sarah said, her eyes welling up with tears. Buddy, who was now calmer, lay down next to Noah's crib, as if he knew his mission had been accomplished. The dog, who had previously seemed to be just bothering the family, was now seen in a new light. He had saved their lives, and Sarah couldn't believe they had almost considered getting rid of him. The police officers continued to explain that the repair would be relatively simple, but the risk the family had taken was real. The wall hid wires that were poorly insulated, and the overload could have caused a fire at any moment. "You guys are lucky to have that dog around," one of the officers commented, giving Buddy an admiring look. Mark was still in shock, trying to process what he had just heard. He looked at Sarah, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. If they had ignored Buddy or made the decision to remove him from the house, who knows what would have happened. "We should have trusted him from the start," Mark murmured, his voice thick with regret. The officers finished their inspection and assured them that they would call in the right professionals to make a complete repair to the wiring. "Everything is going to be okay now," the officer said, reassuring the couple. But deep down, Sarah knew that the real hero in this situation wasn't in a uniform. He had 4 legs and an instinct that saved their lives. Buddy stood by Sarah's side as the police officers left the house. She bent down and hugged him tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "You saved us all," she whispered to the dog, who wagged his tail slowly, as if understanding the weight of those words. Mark walked over and petted Buddy too, finally recognizing the invaluable value that the dog had in their lives. That night, with the wall secure and the danger removed, Sarah and Mark reflected on everything that had happened. What had once seemed like just a dog's strange behavior was now a clear reminder of how small signs can save lives. Buddy wasn't just a dog, he was the family's protector. Word of what Buddy had done spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within days, everyone knew the story of the pit bull that had saved their family from a potential disaster. Neighbors would stop by Mark and Sarah's house to ask about Buddy, impressed by the dog's intelligence and loyalty. Suddenly, the dog that had once seemed like just an ordinary companion had become a true local hero. Sarah, still emotional about everything that had happened, began to tell the story to anyone who asked. She explained how Buddy had insisted on warning them night after night, until they finally decided to investigate what he was trying to show them. Each time she told the story, Sarah felt more grateful for having Buddy by her side. He had protected Noah and saved their lives. Mark, who at first did not believe that Buddy was really trying to warn them, also began to see the dog in a different light. He began to remember all the times Buddy had barked and growled, always staring at that spot on the wall. "If it weren't for him, we might not be here now," Mark said, still surprised by everything that had happened. To thank Buddy, the couple decided to reward him with everything he liked most. Sarah bought special treats, new toys, and even a new bed for the dog. Every day was a new way to spoil him, and Buddy seemed happier than ever. He was now treated like the hero he deserved to be, and even little Noah, still too young to understand what had happened, seemed to feel calmer with Buddy by his side. The days that followed were filled with peace and relief. The house was safe again, and the family's bond with Buddy was stronger than ever. Mark and Sarah had learned an important lesson: never underestimate the instincts of a dog, especially one as loyal as Buddy. They had been through a frightening experience, but thanks to Buddy, everything ended well. Buddy, for his part, seemed to continue to do his part as the faithful guardian of the house. He followed Noah everywhere, as if he knew that his mission to protect the baby was not yet over. Sarah watched tenderly, feeling increasingly blessed to have such a special dog in their lives. What had started as a story of tension and fear was now a reminder that life can change completely because of a simple animal instinct. With the problem solved and the house safe again, life in Mark and Sarah's house returned to normal. But this time, with a new perspective on what it really meant to have Buddy around. The pit bull was not just a companion, he was an essential part of the family. And this was reflected in every little gesture, every affection he received from Sarah, Mark, and even little Noah, who, whenever he saw Buddy, would smile. Sarah still got emotional thinking about what could have happened. Sometimes, while putting Noah to sleep, she would look at the spot where the faulty wiring had been discovered. The idea that a tragedy had been avoided thanks to Buddy's instincts filled her with gratitude. I will never doubt what he tries to tell us again, she thought, petting the dog whenever he was near. Buddy, on the other hand, seemed calmer. Now that the danger had been eliminated, he returned to his calm but still alert routine. He followed Noah around the house, as if he knew that his job was to protect the little one at all times. Sarah and Mark watched this relationship develop and became increasingly emotional. Buddy had a special bond with the baby, and it was something no one could explain. The bond between the couple and the dog also grew stronger. Mark, who had previously been more skeptical about Buddy's behavior, was now the first to defend the dog whenever anyone asked about him. He would tell the story of the hero dog with pride, always highlighting how Buddy's instincts had saved everyone's lives. I had no idea he would be capable of something like this, Mark would say. Now I know he's part of our family, not just a dog. Over time, Buddy's story even made it into a small column in a local newspaper. People in town began to recognize the pit bull when they walked him around the neighborhood. That's the dog who saved the family from the fire, they would say. Sarah and Mark laughed, feeling proud of Buddy, and knew he deserved all the recognition he received. Now, the house was filled with laughter, games, and moments of peace. The tension of the nights when Buddy would bark incessantly seemed like a distant memory. What had once been a source of stress for the family became a story they would tell forever. And as Noah grew older, Sarah and Mark knew that Buddy would continue to be the faithful guardian of the house, always ready to protect everyone. With the wiring fixed, the danger removed, and the family united, they were finally able to move on, knowing that they had been through a difficult time but had come out of it even stronger. Buddy, the four-legged hero, was the symbol of this new phase full of love and security. And for Sarah and Mark, there was no doubt, they were living a blessed life, with the most faithful protector they could have by their side. It's so good to have you here. If you love animal stories as much as I do, subscribe so you don't miss the next videos, take advantage and watch our playlist and get as closer to our stories as you can.